Hi guys, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program. This is version 1.2. The loud and clear update is what it's been billed as. And obviously this is building on the success of 1.1, which was released about a couple of months ago. 1.1, massive update, changed the engine, added loads of new features, loads of new ship parts and stuff like that. 1.2 is a smaller update, but still has some amazing, really big new features, as well as obviously the usual bug fixes and what have you. So I want to take the opportunity just to do a quick summary video, because I've been playing the pre-release, which was out for a couple of weeks, a few weeks ago, and I've been playing around with the actual release, which is this, what I'm playing now. This is 1.2, formally released. And I just wanted to go through some of the features and so on. This was released 11th of October. It's a few days later, so there were some small changes between the pre-release, if you like, the kind of beta for this release, and the full release. So that's just a heads up. If you played the pre-release, there are some very minor changes. Anyway, let's jump straight into it. So the big new feature, if you've got Steam and you've got the news feed, you'll see loud and clear update CommNet. What is CommNet? Well, let's just jump into the tracking station here straight away, just to kind of talk through this. So what CommNet adds is the ability, or the necessity in many ways, to relay data across, if you like, a network of satellites when you are far away from the planet Kerbin. So this is a big warning to people who tend to send probes off way out into out into space, all the way to Joule and what have you. If you're doing that, you could lose control of your probes if you're not careful. If you're not careful and you don't have these relay satellites, which have an icon like this, you could potentially be in quite a bit of trouble. What the relay satellites do, if I just use this CommNet control up here in the top right, apologies, I realise my mouse isn't working. It's a problem with my recording software, not the game. Essentially, if we just click that once, you can see that this relay satellite is bouncing data back down to Kerbin. You've got this green line meaning good signal. Hit it again, we can see that it has a path back to Kerbin. That's not very interesting because we already knew that, because it's only one hop to Kerbin. But if we start turning these on, you can start to see we're actually linking up to quite a few vessels and other bits and pieces. And if we hit whole network, we get a big old load of lines going all over the place. And you can ultimately see what's going on here, all the crux of what's going on. So at the moment we have a relay satellite around the Mun, for instance, which is this one here, and he is relaying data from this Munsat 2B here, which is just a regular probe, and that is going to Munsat, and that is going back to Kerbin. Now, confusingly enough, Munsat 2B actually, as you can see here, based on these green lines, does have its own ability to talk to Kerbin, because it's actually got the range to do so, which is a bit of a spoiler. It kind of makes it, isn't a very good example, but we're going to roll with it. And crucially, I have a rover on the planet as well, which talks to this. That is important because the rover, if I just jump to Jitterbug here, which is my little rover on the Mun, he is kind of sitting here merrily. And he's a happy little fella. There you go. Look, he's got his lights. He can turn them on, and he can rove around if I want him to. The problem is, you can see here he has no visible antenna. In fact, his only antenna, if you like, is the Staputnik, the very basic probe on his front. Now, in the old days of Kerbal Space Program, this would be no problem. I could control him all I want. But if I just quickly jump back to map view here. At the moment, he can actually contact Kerbal from here because he's currently actually got enough range and he's facing the planet. So it's not a very good example. But he is primarily communicating with Munsat 1A over here. That's his kind of line of control. Now, if we didn't have this, or he couldn't talk to Kerbal, so particularly if I rove him over here and he's behind the Mun, he's kind of here sitting behind the Mun. Well, he's got no visible line of sight to Kerbin. Look, he's got to peek round. He can't do that. That's the new aspect of CommNet. These relay satellites have to be in orbit around the body, the moon or the planet, and relay data back to Kerbin. Otherwise, you lose control of the poor little thing. Look at him. He is very weirdly cute in his own inimitable way. But if you look up here on the top left, you have various options. Various readings. And at the moment, you can see I've got full probe control. I have very good signal strength to Munsat. 1A, which is, again, that's the relay satellite I'm using. And I have the ability to actually talk to Kerbin directly. That's great. But it does say at the moment I'm bouncing the signal through the relay for the best signal quality. I can't transmit science at the moment because I don't have the ability from this one. And I have a direct connection to the Space Centre. So he's sitting here merrily on the planet, and he's quite happy. But as I say, if I didn't have that connection back to Kerbin, be aware, if that's the case, you will not be able to control this at all. So that's quite serious. If you decide to drop a probe or a rover or what have you, particularly on somewhere far away, further than the moon, the Mun, or the Minmus at the very extremity of the range, you will need either a very, very big antenna or you'll need a relay satellite chain for CommNet. Let's take another quick look, a quick example, by jumping all the way out to a very, very far place in our solar system here, which is George, all the way over here at the moment. It's a hell of a distance away. You can see some lines coming from there, and that is because, yep, unsurprisingly, I have a good couple of satellites here. And they are currently in orbit around Joule, which is one called JSat-1A, and I have a lathe probe, a probe around lathe. I also have a probe over here. And at the moment, if I jump into lathe probe 1A, which is a very old probe that I set up ages and ages back, it's in a bit of a pickle, because at the moment I have very limited probe control, because if you look at the top left there, there's no signal, I can't get data to it, I can't do anything, because it's not currently able to connect to a relay satellite, and it only has this dreadful little antenna on it, like a TV aerial, a little sort of fold-out radio antenna, and it simply can't contact anything at the moment. It literally is unable to do anything, so I can't do anything with this. I can toggle SAS on, as you can see there at the bottom right. Beyond that, there's not a lot I can do with it. Which is obviously a real problem. If you were going to land this or you needed to make a maneuver with this at this time, you couldn't. You're stuck. There is literally nothing you can do to sort of rectify or make those kind of changes. So that's just a quick heads up, really, that is the case. So, you know, if you are in this situation and, you know, you're simply unable to, you're simply unable to control your craft, this will be the reason. You'll be looking ultimately at a situation where your satellites and so on are happily, they're merrily in orbit, and you have some control, but you will lose control of them if you don't have a CommNet relay setup, and that's obviously a very, very big problem. It means that ultimately you could lose control of your probes and so on, which is obviously not what you want to do. So at the moment, I'm kind of waiting for the JSat-1 to get into range to hopefully show you it connecting up, but I think it's still too far away. Actually, this dreadful old probe of mine is probably not going to be good enough. I would suggest to do it. Has it got energy? Yeah, just about. Oh no, so I've run out of electric charge. Yeah, so it's completely screwed. It's kind of, because it's now behind the planet, it's lost all its electric charge, and I can't do anything with it now. So yeah, it shows how kind of unforgiving this is. But maybe for making other parts, it might be able to get connectivity to JSat-1. I'm not sure if it has the range. This one does. Lathe probe 1E that I'm hovering over now, that has the range to get back to Kerbin on its own, and I'll show you that in a second. The reason why is because it has an upgraded communication relay. It has an upgraded antenna on it, so it can actually talk directly to Kerbin itself, but it does try to bounce it off of JSat-1A. There we go. So it did just briefly connect, and I'm guessing the reason is because it's just about able to reach that. Again, it's a very, very long way even between these two, and you saw there it did connect for a second. There's a little green line appeared, but it's just not got the range to do it. So that's very sad. I've probably lost that probe now, which is a bit of a shame, but that's the way it is. I transmitted all the science from it, so it's not too big a deal. Just to go back to the lathe probe 1E then, let's have a look at its lines. They're a bit more interesting. It ultimately is able to talk back, as you can see these yellow lines here, back to Kerbin. It is able to talk to Kerbin, and it is with very, a green line here, a very stable green line. It is able to talk to JSat-1A. So obviously these indicate signal strength. Green, very good signal. Yellow, not so good signal. And it is able to talk over to JSat-1A. Now, at this point, it is ultimately going to be talking, I guess, to JSat-1A because it's the best line. Let's have a look. But if you have a look here, you'll see I have the big old communitron on it, which has a big old range. It's a big antenna, heavy antenna, mate, more than anything else. And it can talk back to Kerbin, but at the moment it is. I think if we look here, oh no, it's talking directly. It's talking directly to Kerbin because I guess it's not great. There's no real point talking all the way over there to Jewel and then all the way back over there to Kerbin. So just to go over some quick differences between this and another mod some people might know, which kind of mimic this kind of setup, called Remote Tech. That was it. Sorry, I forgot it there for a second. Remote Tech meant you had to have antennas pointing to one another. They literally had to be pointing at one another to work. This at the moment is obviously not pointing at, probably not even pointing at Kerbin. It's sort of pointing the right sort of way, but it's not pointing at Jewel, and it's probably not pointing back home. You don't have to worry about that in CommNet. You don't have to actually have things pointing the right way. So it's a bit of a suspension of disbelief, but honestly, it makes things a lot easier and a lot simpler. But yeah, you can see here, if we didn't have that connectivity, and as we had a worse antenna on Lathe Probe 1E and it couldn't talk directly to Kerbin, it would be talking to the relay satellite here, which it is. It's got a good link there, and then that satellite would bounce the data back to Kerbin. A bit like our rover, he has to rely on our jitterbug rover. He has to rely when he's on the dark side, if you like, when he's on the side not facing Kerbin directly. He's just about got signal there. He has to rely on these relay satellites, and of course they are in orbit, so he only has a little bit of time when they're facing him and he's facing them and they're facing Kerbin. He only has a limited amount of time to talk to them, so it adds a real a new aspect to the game. One of the things that I just wanted to quickly point out is that you have to turn this on if you're using an old sandbox or career mode, what have you. It is the CommNet configuration is not on by default and doesn't get enabled by default if you're using an old game. So in my case, I am, because I recently did a series on 1.1 because I was that late to the game. So if we jump in here and go to settings and then to difficulty options, you'll see this here, enable CommNet network. If that is, you'll basically need to tick that if you're using a custom game, or I think a certain game mode. I think Easy probably doesn't have it on. But yeah, if you're not seeing these lines, you're not seeing the CommNet options, you're not seeing the antennas working as it should, that may be the case. It may be you don't have CommNet actually enabled in the config, and it's nice that you can. So you can play it the old way. In other words, you can play it without CommNet, and you can play it with CommNet. And I probably will play it with CommNet. I think it's a really great idea. I did install Remote Tech back in the day, CommNet is Remote Tech is much more realistic in the sense that it adds delay. So if you're obviously sending signals over vast distances, you do get, in the real world, you get delays. That doesn't happen in CommNet either. So you won't get a delay when you send a command. You won't get that kind of distance, latency. CommNet doesn't really worry about that. So there is some suspension of disbelief still with CommNet, but it adds a bit more. It's kind of like a nice halfway house for people who are really experienced and love certain aspects of Remote Tech. Probably won't like CommNet as much because it doesn't have the same features, but I really like it. I think CommNet is that nice midway house between being near enough impossible at times to kind of align your communications set up and what have you, try and get things from one planet to another. And it was it was tough. It was really hard. It was a great mod. Not take nothing away from it. It was a great mod, but it's very, very hard. And I think the majority of players will just be happy to kind of go, I want to set up, I want to talk from Elu right at the edge of the solar system right the way back to Kerbin. I need to set up a relay network. It's a very interesting thing, and it's kind of fun to do, and it adds a little bit of a dimension to the game, and it adds, I suspect, quite a lot of frustration to the game when you lose a satellite or you lose a probe because you forgot to set up a relay satellite in the system or whatever. So there we are. If you do want to know a bit more about, or do a far more in-depth comparison between Remote Tech and CommNet, Grumpworks has done a great one on his channel, and it's much more in depth than I'm going into in terms of the differences between CommNet and Remote Tech. But they are very, very similar. There are some aspects, as I say, that have been taken, but CommNet is a bit of a midway house between the two options. So let's just quickly jump out of the facility here, and let's go into the vehicle assembly building now. Excuse me. Now, I showed you earlier that there are some new. Here we go. Sorry, I lagged there for a minute. There are some new communication antennas for relay, and they're under, as I say, there's this new setup you can see here. This is actually new as well. They split communications and electrical into different modules, and there's, they've kind of changed the icons here, but it's basically the same. So we have these new relay satellites down here, I beg your pardon. They have the word relay in them, and we have some of the antennas we know and love, and there are a couple of new ones. Like with everything else, these can be damaged during takeoff, so they need to be protected. A bit like any satellite, really. You need to put a fairing on it or what have you to protect it from getting, blown, sideways by re-entry or exiting the atmosphere, what have you. So you need to be very careful with these. But they come in various shapes and sizes. You have a relatively small one, you have the medium-sized one, and typically you have the exceedingly large one, which I have around Joule at the moment. And they again, they have their own ranges, and they have their own kind of setup. That's 100 is it gigameters, I assume it is, and obviously smaller ranges for these. So you need to kind of plan ahead and make sure that you're setting up your communication relay network appropriately. But yeah, that's just the new aspects. In terms of while we're in here talking about new stuff, let's also look just very quickly at a new science option, which is the experiment storage container. Allows you to, as it says there, it's basically kind of a tough bit of kit that basically is better at surviving the rigours of re-entry and so on, so you don't lose your science as often. It allows basically you to store stuff in here, as the name suggests. It's a storage unit, and that's just a new aspect. So if you're sick and tired of losing your experiments and what have you, experimental data during re-entry, what have you, because again things like the where is it? It's there we are. The mystery goo container gets explodes during re-entry and stuff like that, and you lose it and you get frustrated. I know, I've done that many times myself. Speaking from experience, this is quite a good little add. It's experiment storage unit, and that's new. Besides that, in here there's not a great deal new in terms of new stuff. There's some reskinned bits and pieces, but there is a new option for fuel flow, which is kind of interesting. So let's just go into that. So fuel flow, as you know, is kind of a key part of this game, and it's obviously quite non-trivial in itself in many ways. But what it allows what you're allowed to do now is to adjust that fuel flow in such a way that you can ultimately control the manner in which fuel from here flows into other tanks via the kind of the duct, if you like, the external fuel duct. So how does that work? Well, in reality, when you're using this kind of setup for your own spacecraft, this really won't make a huge deal of difference. But because this is attached, it's not going to work now, is it? No. But basically, the new fuel options mean that you get the option to change how the fuel flows from one tank to another. I can see it being useful for space planes where you may want to get high into the atmosphere effectively before you actually drop your tanks, things like that. But there is the new option to add, when you've got these external fuel ducts, there is the option now to add changes to how the fuel flows, if you like, in those between those tanks. And it basically gives the option, as I say, mainly for space planes, where if you wanted to use your engines more for lateral movement, so you want to, in other words, you want to have a slow burn using a few engines and keep those tanks on, you now have the control to do that and then drop them at the end of your burn. In other words, as soon as you reach sort of a reasonable height, you can then do that. What happened before was you didn't really have any control, and obviously the engines burn and burn and burn, and the fuel flowed, and ultimately what happened was the central tank that you had your ducts attached to would have all the fuel, and those on the outside would have no fuel, and you'd be kind of forced to drop them, and you'd basically lose two engines worth of power. Obviously you'd lose weight as well, but basically this gives you the option to set things up a bit differently. So there is the fuel flow control changes, which look really nice, and I will probably play around with them when I get back to looking at space planes. But for now, that's that. So just to go over some of the other aspects that have changed, or really just kind of been improved upon in many ways. The stability assist, the SAS. not the military branch. The SAS system has been improved purely for efficiency. So when you're taking off or you're in orbit and the SAS is on, it should be a bit more efficient. There's far less of that wobbling back and forth. I always sort of likened it to when you tap like a compass, like a magnetic compass pointing north, and you tap it, and the hand, if you like, sort of wobbles back, and the needle wobbles back and forth, and then eventually settles at north. That's what SAS was before, wasn't it? And you used to waste a bit of fuel, whether it was RCS fuel or what have you. That happens far less now. Certainly, I've seen the takeoffs from the launch pad have been much better, and the SAS concept when you're actually in space seems a lot better. It doesn't overshoot the mark and then try to get back to the mark and then overshoot it again and so on. It's much better. There is better precision when you're in the orbit system. So when you are basically that's when you're setting up your maneuver nodes. I've gone into the wrong place there. When you're setting up your maneuver nodes, it's now slightly easier. It's got to be said to configure your maneuvers. There's a bit more precision in doing so. So when you go to add a maneuver, it's difficult to show off. But this is just that little bit easier to use. You can also use the scroll wheel as before, and it doesn't seem to be quite as crazy. Like I've whacked the mouse wheel there, and it obviously flew out. But it does seem as though you can, if I just do this, it's a bit more precise than it was. Sometimes you'd end up with, if I just do that, whoop, there you go. You see, you'd end up with that happening like almost all the time. And it was really frustrating when you were trying to do this. So this seems a lot more refined, a lot more precise. So they've just changed that. They've also changed some aspects of the UI. I don't know what they've done here, but it does, a lot of these buttons and stuff are bigger than they were. It makes it a bit easier to see. And as my YouTube name will probably give away, I can't see particularly well, so this is a very welcome change for me. It makes a lot of these stand out a bit more. Certainly when you're actually in the config here. This bar at the bottom that I've just dropped down, this has the font, I think, has been changed around a bit and is a lot more visible. It's a lot easier to see for me, certainly, and I think they've just done some work on the UI there. So that's another slight improvement. The other aspect is wheel stability. Wheels are always a real problem in these physics games. If anyone's ever played Space Engineers, you'll know what I'm talking about there. Wheels are always a problem, but they have improved the stability of them. You get far less of this nonsense where the wheel will just muck around and fall apart and God knows what else. So let's take Jitterbug for a ride. Let's put his lights on for fun. There he is. There we go. Let's get him rolling. Whereas before, quite a lot of the time, if you were doing this kind of a thing where you're spinning him around trying to fishtail him, the wheels would go nuts and you'd have real problems trying to control him. As it is, wheels are much better now. You can see there he kind of recovered because I was over accelerating. You'd have like a wheel from this wheel sort of bounce and flip him over and goodness knows what else. They have improved that quite significantly. This honestly is a very badly built ship, much as I hate to say it, a rover rather, much as I hate to say it. I love him. He's a lovely looking fella, isn't he? But unfortunately he's not the best, and it does mean that he tips quite a lot. He's a very, very front heavy, so that's why that's happening. But before, these wheels were really funny going over anything against turning. You'd often end up with the ship. He would have flipped by now if I was doing this. He would have literally flipped over. Something would have gone wrong with these wheels. So they have improved the stability. Let's stop them there. Put the brakes on, and we'll see you in a bit, mate. We'll leave you here. We'll leave him here to there we go. Recover his energy back because obviously that takes quite a lot of energy. He doesn't have great batteries on board. One of the first rovers I've ever made in this game, and I sort of put him on there and left him and forgot about him, honestly, but he's fine. So other than wheel stability and bits like that, there are some performance improvements overall. Again, the game does definitely feel smoother. For instance, I was setting up the CommNet network there. I was obviously having to launch all of these probes and what have you, and I've got to say, certainly the takeoff feels a lot smoother. That with the stability assist changes makes it feel a lot smoother overall. We've already seen the categorization changes and the new antenna options and the experimental storage container. That's available obviously in the vehicle assembly building. So if you see on the left here, when it pops up, there we go. As I said before, the module system here has changed, but that's purely because communications have obviously become quite an important aspect of the game, so they've been put into their own little sort of area. They used to be on the sides. and then not anymore. So it kind of cleans up the science area and means you now have these in their own special place. Besides that, there is that's pretty much it. There is new intro. I noticed when I logged into the game, there's a couple of new sort of intro pictures and what have you of Kerbals doing their thing. Beyond that, that is it. As I say, Comnet, hugely fun. Seems like a really, really good update, something people wanted. That's why mods exist, because people want them. And again, it's a good example of Squad doing seemingly what they do best, which is obviously taking that on board and kind of taking the best parts of remote tech and maybe making it a bit easier. Yeah, as I say, if you're a big fan of remote tech, you might think, I like positioning my satellites in certain ways and making sure I have it, and that's actually up to you. But certainly for the novice player, for people like me who are a bit scrubbish, that was a very hard mod to get your head around. It's a very hard mod to get working, but very rewarding when you did. But I think CommNet's just as rewarding. It means that when you're planning missions to Duel or further afield, it means that you're going to have to think about having relays to get your data back. You're going to have to think about weight of your antennas and stuff, whereas before you just chucked a probe on it and sent it off and it was fine. You could control it all you want. The nightmare is obviously going to be when you're going down to land and you suddenly lose contact with Kerbin and you can't control your probe. I'm looking forward to that. That's gonna have me raging, probably, I would imagine, more than a few times in the future. But the fact you can turn it off as well in the settings, as I showed earlier, you can turn CommNet on or off in your game. And certainly if you're a new player to the game, I'd recommend having it maybe just turned off until you get used to setting up orbits and what have you. And I suspect that's probably a default for easy mode and stuff. But if you're really into it, for realism, from a realism point of view, it's very, very good. So there we are. That is the 1.2 update. Fantastic. As I say, I'm really, really enjoyed the pre-release stuff when I saw it, and now it's been formally released. As I say, I thought I'd do this video just to show off all the features, which hopefully I've done. I think that's all of them. I'm just looking through the release notes, and there's as I say, there's various patches and fixes, but those are the main aspects shown off. The CommNet fuel flow stuff, which I didn't really show off, but it's present and you can probably look it up if you're interested. As I say, it's more for space planes and stuff like that, which I'm not too familiar with, but it's there and it looks very in depth and very in detail, and it looks very cool. So by all means, have a play with that. Again, I think there was a mod for that which allowed you to do exactly the same sort of thing. So it's again Squad really taking the best aspects of mods and putting them in the game for players to enjoy, which is really, really good. Ironically enough, again, I'm going to give it yet another plug. It is actually currently, Kerbal Space Program is on Steam and it is on sale. I think that is until the 18th of October. It's on sale currently. I think it's about 17 quid, which is what I bought it for years ago. So, my opinion, it's a real steal. I think that's a fantastic price for a fantastic game. But again, I'm not sponsored. Should point that out. It's not sponsored by Squad or Kerbal Space Program. I just wanted to give it a plug because it's a great game. And the 1.2 update is yet another brilliant update, and it's cheaper on Steam. So by all means, go and pick it up if you can. And I just hope this video was of use to people who are interested in the 1.2 update and the new features. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.